So, have you ever been advertised a game and then you buy it, you take it home, open it up, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, this isn't the visually impressive game I wanted? Well, let's introduce you to every child's playmate.
The Handheld Wars is nothing to scoff at. There was some serious competition back then, and nowadays it's child's play. Anyone will react to anything that they announce for handhelds.
Oh man, that's so iconic, come on. Oh my god, it looks so good!
But the Handheld Wars don't really get talked about a whole lot. Yeah, I think I might know why.
It was a brutal battle of screen size, battery life, library, and condoms.
Says you can't have fun without protection. The handheld market kinda existed with a few devices in the 70s and 80s. A watch can do more than that.
Nothing was really catching people's eyes until the Game Boy line. It was catching their attention, but not their eyes.
The Game Boy, one of Nintendo's greatest successes. Only if you had a light around.
Come on, can't you tell I'm playing Mario?
One of the major downfalls of the Nintendo handheld lineup until the Nintendo DS, they really had no built-in lights on the base models. Only a few instances like the Game Boy Light in Japan, with the rest of the world getting the Game Boy Advance SP, had some sort of light for you to see what you're playing. I don't know which one looks worse, with a light or with a light. The Game Boy library had an incredible lineup. Sure, the cards couldn't really hold much, but there was Golf, Tetris, Super Mario Land, Pokemon, Dr. Mario, Kirby's Dream Land, Yoshi's Cookie, because every Game Boy is not complete without a Yoshi's Cookie. Now, the oldest handheld from Nintendo I have right now is the Game Boy Advance, so why don't I have one?
Because I was too busy playing this.
The ads for the Game Boy were amazing. A robot zapping a kid into existence to play a Game Boy? Wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. Let me tell you a little secret. The Atari Lynx was the first major piece of competition that rivaled the Game Boy, and it was leagues better than the Game Boy. It was more powerful, it had a color screen, it looked like a phone, and the screen was even lit. Atari was confident that this thing was going to beat the Game Boy. This thing only had 100, or actually even under 100 titles for it, and it launched for $180. Just buy a Game Boy, you're not going to have to use your mortgage money for a Game Boy. The Sega Game Gear also rivaled the Game Boy, releasing shortly after they realized that the Atari Lynx was failing. It didn't last very long. Sega Game Gear was the first big competitor, bigger than Atari, you see. Basically, it had all the features that the Atari Lynx had, high-quality games, color display, making your house be daytime. It's a fine system, nothing to write home about, but it definitely showed Nintendo that they weren't the only ones in the handheld market. Then Sega tried with the Sega Nomad and flopped hard. The Sega Nomad would let everyone know that you had this thing in your pocket, and it played actual Sega Genesis games. None of that sounds like a good idea. This thing ate through batteries like crazy, and Nintendo had the Game Boy Color lasting 4 years on one single battery. Nintendo knows how to make a handheld, and a good one. Do you know what they did to improve the Game Boy? Gave us a color screen because light is not an issue yet. This one confuses me. You release a Game Boy revision that has a built-in light at the same time you release one without light, but a color screen. And another thing is that people have been debating, is the Game Boy Color an upgrade or a successor? Why can't it be both?
It's illegal.
The Nintendo Game Boy Color offered a lot more opportunity with the color screen. For example, The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening DX feature color-based puzzles. During the beginning, most of the Game Boy Color games were compatible with the original Game Boy. But later on in its life, the Game Boy Color started to get exclusive after exclusive for the Game Boy Color.
But just you wait, all your dreams will come true with the Game Boy Advance. A higher color count, the quality of the games are Super Nintendo quality now, and the best feature of all, shoulder buttons.
That's right, you heard me, the third generation of Game Boy, and there's still no backlight. I mean, this was an incredible console, and what was the competition? Embarrassment. No major competition for the Game Boy Advance, but strangely no original Mario platformer game for it either, which is very, very strange.
They were too scared.
But when 2004 rolled around, something major happened. Yes, the presidential election did happen this year, but that's not what we're talking about. The Nintendo DS was released, revolutionizing the handheld market forever. They made it seem it was like a third pillar into the gaming scene rather than a successor. But Sony had something up their sleeves. something that would be the biggest competitor since the Sega Game Gear, the PSP. 5 of them if you're sane. The PSP being a very successful handheld and a first go at the handheld market for Sony was impressive, and it was even able to pump out PS2-like graphics. The Nintendo DS? I mean, it kinda can do 3D. The only true 3D open-world game that I can think of for the DS is Super Mario 64 DS, which that was just a remake to show that it was possible. But the PSP had loads upon loads of 3D games no matter if it was open world or just music rhythm. The 3DS makes me laugh. The Nintendo 3DS is Nintendo's last go at a traditional handheld, and it was an incredible game system, an incredible library, backwards compatible with the DS, digital games, virtual console letting you play older NES, SNES, and even Game Boy and Game Boy Color games on the system. No Game Boy Advance because Nintendo never let people experience it unless you spent more money for the system, i.e. before the price cut in 2011. The PS Vita is another go around with Sony, and this one was a failure. Not as many games. Sure, it had PS3 level graphics, and not just a touchscreen, but a rear one too. But this game system failed. The same reason with the Wii U, not enough titles. But then, the Nintendo Switch took over as the handheld that Nintendo focuses on, which gave a console experience on the go, which is awesome. Wii U dabbled into this, but only if you were close enough to the system. But the Nintendo Switch not only lets you take it to the other room, but outside.
Finally, I can play Goat Simulator wherever I go now!
There really isn't much competition now that scares Nintendo. Oh, wait, there might be. The Steam Deck. Basically a gaming PC, but in the form factor like the Nintendo Switch, letting you play PC games or even any game that you can get working on here anywhere you go. And Sony recently announced the Project Q.
And that was it for the handheld gaming competition. A fierce competition that made people laugh. But of course, the handheld gaming competition is the least of our problems. It's going to be a wild ride.